This is the Gavel. Welcome. I am Terry Ikumi. It was such an interesting week in Parliament. Having passed the electoral bill in January this year, lawmakers suddenly realized that as statutory delegates, they had not given themselves the right to vote during party conventions and congresses. So both chambers had to hastily pass a new amendment to Section 84, subsection 8, to allow elected officials vote as statutory delegates. There was, however, a mild drama in the lower chamber. Take a listen.
The Senate has again amended the 2022 Electoral Act to allow statutory delegates participate and vote in the conventions and congresses of political parties. This is ahead of the primary elections to be held by the various political parties this month for the emergence of candidates for the 2023 general elections. The amendment follows the expeditious consideration of the bill, which scaled first, second, and third readings during Tuesday's plenary session. Those identified as statutory delegates include the President, Vice President, members of the National Assembly, governors and their deputies, members of the State Houses of Assembly, chairmen of councils, councillors, National Working Committee of political parties, among others. The sponsor of the bill, Senator Oviomo Agege, says the amendment became necessary to correct an unidentified error in the Electoral Act signed by President Muhammadu Buhari this year.
Section 84, subsection 8 of the Electoral Act 2022 does not provide for the participation of what is generally known as statutory delegates in the conventions, congresses, or meetings of political parties. The extant subsection only clearly provides for the participation of elected delegates in the conventions, congresses, or meetings of political parties held to nominate candidates for political parties. Mr. President, this is an unintended error, and we can only correct it with this amendment now before us. The passage of this bill, Mr. President, my colleagues, will further strengthen our electoral system.
Meanwhile, following the Senate's amendment, the House of Representatives convened an emergency plenary session on Wednesday, with the Deputy Speaker presiding, to consider and pass an amendment to the Electoral Act 2022. The bill is speedily passed through first and second reading.
The only consideration we have before us today is only this section of the law, which has to do with the inclusion of statutory delegates. Nothing more, nothing less. Mr. Speaker, this is an amendment that all of us individually and collectively agreed to. And I also want to authoritatively communicate to you that the other suspicious and the controversial clause has failed in the sister Senate chamber. So we are on the same page. No trouble, no wahala.
However, a rowdy moment occurred when the motion for consideration of the bill was put to vote and majority voted against it.
Withdrawn. Thank you very much. Thank you. Let it be withdrawn. Leader. Please, colleagues.
Apparently, another amendment beyond that of the statutory delegates was before the House, and lawmakers were not having it.
In favor of the motion, say aye. Against say nay. That's have it. Clerks invited the long title of the bill.
The matter was eventually cleared and the amendment passed.
A bill for an act to further amend the Electoral Act number 13, 2022 and for related matters. Third reading.
Outside the chamber, the majority leader gave details of the rejected amendment clause, which generated an uproar in the chamber.
Sometimes you find speculations taking lead of our proceedings. Some members, of course, were awash with speculations that just as the Senate tried to do in the Senate sitting, that we were going to cut short the number of days that were meant for conduct of primaries and the scope of the time frame available to INEC for preparations before final nominations. In the Principal Act, as it were, we provided for 180 days. And the wisdom was to allow for political parties and potential aspirants or candidates to have enough time to consult widely. So some people felt 180 days was too much for such an exercise or for such an engagement. There were some concern, especially on the part of the political parties. I think you're aware the political parties went to INEC to protest and urge INEC to see if they can cut short that length of time, that 180 days. So that was transpired or communicated to us as a leadership, and we contemplated bringing it contemplated bringing it on the floor to see if we could cut short 180 days as contained in the bill itself, in that particular clause that we were to amend. It was this particular issue in discourse that created uproar. Members said no to it.
He also reacted to the appeal court ruling setting aside the Abia State High Court judgment nullifying Section 84, subsection 12 of the Electoral Act.
We have three arms of government, and no one arm of government, no one institution of democracy in Nigeria can dare try to take away the powers of the other. It is in our own constitutional powers to make laws. It is also in our own constitutional powers to be custodians of the laws. And when laws are made by the National Assembly, Terry, no one should dare breach such laws.
The House of Representatives is championing Africa's cause for full recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic economic shock. Speaker of the House, Femi Gbajabiamila, in 2020 had carved the idea of a collaboration among speakers and heads of African parliaments. And since then, 3 virtual meetings had been held owing to the COVID-19 restrictions. However, on Monday, the first in-person meeting of members of the Conference of African Speakers and Heads of African Parliaments, COSAP, was held, with members, among other things, calling for debt cancellation for African countries.
The Congress Hall of Transcorp Hilton, Abuja, played host to speakers and heads of parliament of 181 parliaments across Africa under the umbrella of the Conference of Speakers and Heads of African Parliament, COSAP. They were in Nigeria to discuss a common challenge, the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on African economies, and how parliamentary leadership can enhance a post-COVID economic recovery. Its convener and chair, the Speaker of the Nigerian House of Representatives, Mr. Femi Gbajabiamila, believes this conference is important as African nations must work together to deliver the dividends of democracy to the people.
As leaders in this new world, there is no decision more consequential than investing in Africa's young people, protecting them, ensuring their health and well-being, and providing them with a solid education upon which to build their future.
Goodwill messages at the conference underscored the sheer magnitude of Africa's economic regression because of the pandemic. With 11.5 million COVID-19 infections across the continent, 253,000 people have died from the disease. The pandemic did more than take lives. African countries registered a minus 1.5% decline in economic growth. 26 million people are now below the poverty line, and 40 million jobs were lost. For the head of the African Development Bank, whatever recovery plans the parliamentarians enforce must have a visible impact on the quality of life of all Africans.
The recovery must create jobs and recover jobs that have been lost. The recovery must focus on the micro, the small and medium-sized businesses, most of whom were closed down from this pandemic.
The Vice President, Professor Yemi Osinbajo, ranked the socioeconomic cost of the pandemic on Africa very high, restating the need for debt cancellation for all African countries, proper investment in health, agriculture, and information technology, and the need for collaboration.
We must build strong collaborative partnerships across the aisles in our parliaments, with our judiciaries, with the executive, with the private sector, and with civil society. And if we learned anything at all from COVID-19 and its aftermath, it is that no nation, no institution, no group, no individual can succeed alone.
On the second day, after an intense round of discussions following the first non-virtual conference since October of 2020, 14 heads of parliament from Nigeria, Algeria, Cameroon, the Kingdom of Eswatini, Ghana, Malawi, Rwanda, South Sudan, Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic, Sao Tome and Principe, Senegal, South Africa, and Zimbabwe, having spent the last 48 hours deliberating on how to address some of Africa's challenges, held a press conference to highlight their observations and recommendations.
A continent that cannot feed itself cannot lead itself. For Africa to lead in the 21st century, first, it must learn to cater to its own needs, and legislative interventions should prioritize and foster these. Also is the need to build local industrial capacity, there is a need to build internal capacity and local industries to enable local production and processing of raw materials for export. And connected to that is the issue of building resilience against economic shocks. There is a need for African economies to build resilience against external and internal shocks, eliminating dependency on external institutions, lenders, and grantors. In essence, Africa has to stand on its own feet. Also is the issue of resource mobilization. There is a need for parliaments to create legislation that support mobilizing domestic revenues by safeguarding resource revenues and expanding tax bases, rationalizing tax incentives, simplifying tax filing, improving compliance strategies, and enhancing automation. Relatedly, legislation should be put in place to enable the provision of stimulus packages to enable MSMEs to recover from adverse shocks of COVID-19.
For the convener of the conference and Speaker of the Nigerian House of Representatives, debt cancellation for African countries is a major concern for COSAP to aid Africa's development, especially with the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic.
COSAP, as we have come to know it, Conference of Speakers of African Parliaments, was set up at the advent of COVID-19, and was set up principally, well, we haven't met. This is our first in-person meeting. Clearly, because of travel restrictions, we had met on 3 different times through Zoom conferences. So this is our first in-person meeting, and it was set up to address basically issues that are strictly African, or mostly African, on how we can speak with one voice as a continent through Parliament, on how we can develop our continent, on how we can harness our resources, on how we can make a better way and a better life for the people and those who we represent. We tackled first and foremost, and still tackling, the issue of debt cancellation as opposed to review of debts, which we all know about. We felt that debt cancellation will provide African countries with the much needed resources, will free up the much needed resources to develop the continent.
COSAP is, however, not unmindful of the endemic corruption in Africa, which has also hindered the continent's development.
For instance, when we talked about debt cancellation and debt forgiveness, we felt Parliament should be involved and speak as one voice, and speak to our creditors and make a case as to why we needed debt forgiveness. But that we also agreed that in doing so, we are going to push for a tripartite agreement between the creditors, the executive or the government, and the legislators. Reason being, even when your debt, or if your debt is forgiven and funds are freed up to be diverted into other areas, health, education, and the rest of it, the creditors would need to be assured or guaranteed that the body, the institution that is responsible for appropriation is involved, and that's the case we're making. And COSAP, as an institution, has made commitments, even signed commitments within ourselves, and ready to commit to the creditors that we would follow the money. We would appropriate the freed up funds, and we would follow and monitor that money, because, and that's where the issue of corruption came in, so that those monies are not diverted into other things that were not agreed upon.
As Africa struggles to recover from the multifaceted effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, COSAP recognizes the crucial role parliamentarians play as custodians of democracies and believes that African parliaments speaking with one voice will help the continent attain a common front on major issues for the good of the continent.
Welcome back to the Gavel. The leadership of the House of Representatives on Tuesday waded into the aviation crisis, which led the Airline Operators Association of Nigeria to threaten to shut down flight operations across the country. At the meeting, which lasted over 3 hours at the National Assembly, the House leadership, led by Speaker Femi Gbajabiamila, secured the commitment of the NNPC to make available 6 million litres of Jet A1 aviation fuel to the marketers in the interim. Here's how that went.
In the past 3 months, flight fares have more than tripled. During this time, at least 4 of these meetings have been held. At the last meeting, a resolution was reached for the sale of aviation fuel at 500 naira per litre as a 3-day interim measure, and the granting of aviation fuel import licenses to the operators. On Tuesday, the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Femi Gbajabiamila, convened this meeting between the leadership of the House of Representatives and stakeholders in the aviation sector to address the threat by airline owners to ground operations because of the high cost of Jet 1 aviation fuel. But the engagement got off on a bumpy start when the Speaker realized that the central bank governor had sent a representative instead of appearing himself.
He couldn't make it, so he had asked for permission that I represent him. He apologized profusely.
Well, why couldn't he make it?
He had other engagements in Lagos.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
You will have to excuse us if you don't mind. Please?
Okay.
Thank you.
Honorable Speaker, sir.
The Speaker frowned at the practice of chief executives of government agencies and the private sector refusing to honor invitations of Parliament on issues of national importance and refused to allow representation of the CBN governor.
Shutdown of airline operations has the potential of shutting down this government. We cannot sit here as stakeholders, fold our arms, and watch this happen. That's why I was visibly angry when the CBN governor was not here. Because his role, functions are very crucial, are very critical to resolution of some of these matters.
Minutes later, the CBN governor joined the meeting and explained his reason for showing up late.
This letter of invitation was received at my office around 11 a.m. this morning, and I was at Lagos, missed my flight, and I directed our Deputy Governor Economic Policy to represent me, standing for me, pending my arrival at Abuja.
The meeting got underway as stakeholders laid their cards on the table on the cause of the increase in the cost of aviation fuel from 150 naira to 700 naira in 1 year.
All the Nigerian airlines at the rate of we are getting the freight now, we go extinct in 3 weeks' time. It will be worse than that we shut down for 2 days or 3 days because jobs will be lost, banks will be hit.
As far as I know, 75% of aviation fuel brought to Nigeria is brought by the NNPC, by Duke Oil. So if the NNPC or Duke Oil, NNPC is going to give that product to the marketers, why can't NNPC give us to us?
It's not every marketing company that can handle etiquette, including the chairman's company. We cannot give him, he has a marketing company, we can't give him etiquette to handle. NNPC is not interested in importing etiquette in this country. We will be very happy to be excused from importing etiquette into the country, and the solution to do is provide FX to the marketers. And we're happy to exit this.
The suggestion of the Speaker for a closed-door session was not agreed to by the Group Managing Director of the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation.
Ladies and gentlemen of the press, I'm aware that they are coming to this floor to cast aspersions on the NNPC, to say that we are the ones who are increasing the price of this product. We are the ones that are not allowing this product prices to come down. Now, I'm very aware of this before I came here. And that's why when you ask for executives, I said, no, let us speak it out so that they can say what they want.
After about 3 hours, the Speaker secured a commitment from the NNPC for what appears to be an interim solution to avert the shutting down of flight operations across the country.
NPC and the airline operators have both agreed
that in the interim, for 3 months, that your marketers of choice that you are comfortable with and you know their markup will not drive you out of business will be supplied with jet fuel. Yeah, we agreed on that. And that there's 6 benevolence of the governor of Senegal, there's 6 million liters available now at 480.
Now finally, let's take a look at the interaction between the House Ad Hoc Committee on the State of the Country's Refineries and the GMD of the NNPC, Mele Kyari, to ascertain why the refineries are not producing at optimum capacity, as well as the meeting between the Senate President and the National Association of Nigerian Students on the ASUU strike. The Group Managing Director of the Nigerian National Petroleum Company Limited, Mr. Mele Kyari, finally appeared before the House Ad Hoc Committee on the Status of the Nation's Refineries after failing to honor 2 previous invitations. Mr. Kyari began by apologizing to the lawmakers and assuring that total rehabilitation of the refineries was underway.
We appreciate your agreeing to see us today, despite the fact that there's an earlier invitation we couldn't meet because I was physically not available. And I sought the grace of the committee for me to be here today or this week. And we're happy that you allow us to come, not for anything, Excellency, Honorable Chairman. We have deep respect for this National Assembly. The refineries were essentially not properly managed over time, and not just today, in the last 20 to 25 years, leading to where we are. And when we took over, it is very, very obvious that what you are dealing with is not a turnaround maintenance. You are dealing with a total rehabilitation. The refineries were clearly in a situation where ordinary turnaround maintenance will not solve the problem. We have degradation of a monumental proportion that we met. And of course, the only way you can do this is to conduct a full turnaround maintenance. Before I took responsibility, we shut down some of them for very obvious technical reasons. First, the refineries, even if they do operate, they will take $100 crude and produce $70 product.
What is the quantity of PMS received per day in exchange for the quantity of crude oil swapped?
These are very specific numbers, and there's no way I can give you a number on this moment. First, let me tell you the principle around this. I know today how much PMS we have in the country. I know we have up to 2.8 billion liters of PMS in the country this moment, sufficient to keep us for 47 days, even if we don't import. This is basic information that I know.
Lawmakers question the total amount for the rehabilitation of the refineries.
We know the contract sum, sir. We're hiding nothing from you. There is no variation on this contract. For instance, Mr. Chairman, if you look at number 3 item on the request that you sent to us, total cost outlay and percentage of funding. Total cost, my understanding is that this is a contract sum. If you look at the document I submitted to you, same number 3, you will see the approval is for $1.559 billion, including VAT.
Now the GMD says the total contract sum is $1.something billion. Was it part of the major contract and the survey for the consultancy? Was that 1.5 part of it? Or is there any differentials in it?
The lawmakers resolved that the NNPC should provide necessary documents.
GMD and his team will submit all the necessary documents to us before end of work on Friday. And we also agreed that we will reconvene on the 3rd of June. He will reappear on the 3rd of June, 2022.
Meanwhile, Senate President Ahmed Lawan is faulting the 2009 agreement between the federal government and the Academic Staff Union of Universities, ASUU. He says the agreement should not have been signed by both sides because there's no way government will provide the kind of resources that agreement requires. He made these remarks during a meeting with officials of the National Association of Nigerian Students, NANS. Senator Lawan, however, assures the students that the upper chamber will intervene in the crisis, but appeals to them to avoid confrontation and not disrupt political activities.
So long as this 2009 agreement is the contention, I think this contention will last long, because I don't see federal government getting all those kind of resources. We'll make concerted and sustained efforts to bring back ASUU and the federal government back to the negotiating table.
Well, that's the Gavel this week. Send feedback to thegavel@channelstv.com. I am Terry Ikumi. Goodbye.